Once there was an age when stones could move. My grandfather told me this story many years ago, and he said that, well, when he was younger, he went to Japan to learn Zen Buddhism, and he sat one day with his sensei, with his Zen master, in a rock garden. And his Zen master was an old man. He had wrinkles on his mouth, a mouth that saw many smiles, a mouth that saw many tears. And the first sentence that this old man said to these students of Zen, to the monks, the first sentence that this teacher uttered was this: once there was an age where stones could move. So they sat in a circle in the beautiful Zen rock garden, the students and the teacher, overlooking the ocean and the wind and the waves and the cliff, all created movement and rhythm. There they sat overlooking the most beautiful Zen rock garden. It is an old story, the teacher said. It is an old story about this very garden. And this garden installed and instilled peace and harmony in everybody that looked at it. After a short while, all the students started breathing in the same rhythm and the same pace. And the teacher was smiling, and he said that this is the only rock garden in the world which is not an artifact. This is the only rock garden in the world with which man had nothing to do. This is the only rock garden in the world that was created solely by nature. And he had heard this story from his own sensei. Once they sat in the same place, sat in a circle. Once there was an age when stones could move, he heard. And his own sensei heard this story from his teacher when he was a student sitting in a circle, not unlike you, not unlike now, breathing in and out, watching inside and outside, alternating between focus. Once there was an age when stones could move. And if you look at the body of somebody who is stuck, where thesis and antithesis have yet to find a joint rhythm, when breathing is yet to form in continuation of movement, whereupon in-breath followed naturally by out-breath, where they are perspective of the same thing, just like you are breathing now. When in-breath and out-breath are merged, and one cannot fully say where one ends and the other begins. I know these cycles. As I've been there many times before, I too find myself going there every once in a while, down spiraling into a persistent rock bottom. How can I safely emerge? How can I safely take one breath and let it form the beginning of movement? And he sat there and looked. How old was he? 80 years old? 100? 318? An old man, yet his eyes still so clear, and his smile as empowering as it ever was. An old man. Once there was a time when stones could move. And how far back does this story go, nobody knows. Perhaps forever. This is the story of that garden, at which no one could look with indifference. This is the story of that garden, which harmony turns oblivion into serenity and anxiety into curiosity, which order invites your thousandfold lotus of the heart to blossom. And in that time, when stones could move, there were two types of stones. In fact, at that time, the stones that could move couldn't but move. Well, the first type of stones were dynamic stones, and they were forever rolling, restlessly exploring different landscapes, oceans and islands, mountains and hills, valleys and plateaus. They had the gift of the explorer, of the discoverer, and they sensed this beautiful three-dimensional world without end. The dynamic stones were forever in motion. They never rest for a second, recklessly exploring, restlessly rolling, always on the move. They never stop to think, they never stop to process or to reflect. But oh, the beauties of their views they've seen, and oh, the wonders they found, and oh, the treasures they have witnessed. And the other type of stones were the static stones, and they looked on the outside very much like the stones we know today. They never moved. They never changed position, and a stone was very likely to die in the place where she was born. Paralyzed, these static stones observed the world with its wonders and beauties. Well, they were absorbing as much as they could from their limited two-dimensional landscape. Because when you're not moving, you see the world in two dimensions. They spend their nights and days reflecting, thinking, processing, understanding the information they've gathered, and making sense of the universe. And yes, indeed, they never started moving. They never explored the uncharted territories of the universe, but oh, the depth of their understanding, and oh, the length of their reflection, and oh, the beauties of their insights. And it was known to everybody that it is a law of nature that if you were born a static stone, then never again will you move. And if you were born dynamic, you will forever be in the move. So while the dynamic stones had the gift of exploration and movement, the static ones had the gift of reflection and understanding, and neither group had the talent of the other. A hand on your belly, another against the heart. Just watch your breath. Are there friends or foes? Are there one? Listen to the undercurrent movements, drawing patterns of connection in the story. Yet it is a fascinating one, of the sort that brings tears to your eyes. of the sort that challenges the laws of nature. Because one small rock, she was merely a young stone, not more than a few hundred years old. She was pretentious and stubborn enough to challenge these laws of nature. As she was born static, she had many hundreds of years to reflect upon her destiny. And she decided that it didn't suit her. I can do more than this, she thought. I want to move despite the rules of nature. And so were the rules of nature. And she wanted to move. How do you will yourself to move? She thought about all that is happening inside her, about her thoughts, about her understandings, about her insight. Couldn't it be that all these movements inside can be translated into movement outside? Why wouldn't it be possible for me to move physically too? What an amazing life would it be if I could join the amazing depth of insight with the beauties of the world. How do you will yourself to move? With will. And for decades, she willed herself to move, single-pointedly focusing on one thing alone: movement, on being in movement. Her entire attention was about making a change, making the slightest of movement. Her entire focus was about being in movement. She was as dedicated as dedication go, as disciplined as discipline reach. Until one day, after some hundreds of years of trying so hard, one day she moved. It was the slightest of movements. It was so small, if you wouldn't have paid close attention to it, you might have easily missed it. But she moved. She moved, a tiny movement, the slightest of moves. And yet it was so powerful. It was so amazing. And if stones could shed tears of happiness, this would be the time where the stone should cry. And from then onwards, well, she spent years amplifying and perfecting and developing that which was a beginning. She took this small movement and built on it again, single-pointedly focusing on movement, on spending every second of her life perfecting it, learning to roll. Yet it was easier because she knew she had it in her. It was easier because she knew she could. And so after many efforts, she did. Her movement increased by the day. And after a few decades of practice, of disciplined, committed practice, she started rolling. And what a day it was. She was leaving the place where she was born. She was being looked at by the stones around her with disbelief and awe and fear. The first time a stone disputed the laws of nature, she moved. She moved and rolled over the world that was unexplored by her, seeing everything in three-dimensional. For the first time. Well, her body wasn't accustomed to such movement, so it was very painful at first, and yet uncharted territories opened up for her. Opened up before her, and it was exciting, and it was beautiful. It was so beautiful, and she dared not stop. The little stone dared not stop and rest. Her years of reflexive understanding found no outlet in her frantic lifestyle. yet a magical universe was tempting her to go on. How can I ever risk the beauties that I was given? How could I risk the chance that never again will I be able to see her, tempting her to go on, to keep on going? And the small fist of a baby clings on to his mother's hair, to his mother baby, to his mother body. You shall not leave me. And the cries of a baby are so strong. These are the howling of a lonesome wolf. These are the howling marking the end of the world. Never again, the baby feared, would my mother hold me in her arms. Never again will I be safe. So you open up to touch. So you stay in touch and watch the attachment grows. Never again leave me. Never ever change. But life never stops. So she explored amazing mountains. She was rolling uphill and snake-like valleys downhill, moving along coastal flatlands and inside woods, into the plateaus of the seas, and in swamps, in dense material and in smooth material, and never stopping down the sea, allowing the different currents to explore her as well. It was a nice, albeit unknown feeling. Sometimes the sea breathed in tandem with her, and she saw so many colors. She saw the earth when it was fertile and the earth when it was barren. And she knew emotions she had never known before. However, reflection and understanding found no outlet in her lifestyle. Reflection and understanding had no place in her constant movement, and she never stopped. She knew that as soon as she stopped, she will never again move. And this was too painful to risk. This were the laws of nature, and having broken them once, and seen all the beauties and wonder of the world, she didn't want to miss it. Until one day. Till one day she was rolling somewhere, she was on her way to somewhere else, when she noticed a beautiful hill. It was a sandy hill, quite steep, quite beautiful, and without thinking, she started rolling uphill, ever so slightly resisting the pressure of gravity and sand as she ascended. The hill was sandy and quite steep, and yet she rolled, slowly paving her way up. And there she was. For the first time in many years, she stopped breathing, because underneath her, she saw the most beautiful thing in her life. There she was, with her white foams violently breaking against the black rocks. There she was, with her pale pinkish greens overcasting beautiful corals, clear water and fish, and deeper the blues, and deeper the yellows, and deeper the greens and turquoise, and deeper still the black and the purples. There she was, the ocean. And she was looking with hungry eyes at her, and the ocean was looking at her in the same pace, slowly. She was awed by the gentle rhythm of the ocean, by the fact that it was moving and still at the same time. The gentle surface danced without moving and stayed still rhythmically. There she was, the ocean, the most awesome and incomprehensible of beings in the universe. And she looked at the ocean with great awe, surprised, grateful, hypnotized, mesmerized by her pace, just looking, going deeper inside. So much movement, and yet at the same time everything is so still. It is so strange. Realizing the depth of what is happening in here right now. That by looking you take part. That by listening you participate. And daring to go there. And daring to breathe deeper. Fascinated. For days she was just looking. You are just looking. An onlooker has sometimes the illusion of non-participation. But you watch. You breathe, and you breathe, and you watch, and your breath moves with what you see, with what you hear, with what you feel. Your breathe and your breath move with you and with the world, and it calls for touch, and it yearns to embody, to become what is possible for a soul, for breath, for you to become. And it was only after 3 or 4 days when she realized that for the last few days she ceased from moving. She wasn't moving. She was merely looking, appreciating. There she stayed on the cliff, down looking the ocean, and a great fear started to grow in her heart, a great fear. Surely, once I've stopped, never again will I be able to move, she thought, and a tremendous pain and sorrow born. Her heart burned. It was frightening. It was so frightening from her. And she was panicking. And she became anxious. And that moment, from this sorrow, from that anxious, from this movement and anxiety and panic, she started to shake and to rock, and something in her started to move anxiously, and she was anxious, and she was anxious, and then she started moving, and she moved in circles, circling round and round, round and round, circling around herself. And the quicker she circled, the deeper she dug herself in the sand. And the deeper she dug herself in the sand, the more anxious she became. And the more anxious she became, the quicker she circled herself. And the quicker she circled herself, the deeper she dug herself in the sand. And the more anxious she became, and the more anxious she became. And so, after a few weeks, there was very little of her left outside. A tiny piece of rock that could be merely seen from the surface. And even if she tried, she could no longer move. She was stuck. What a paralyzing feeling. Almost totally buried. She was stuck. And if stones could cry of despair, if rocks would shed a tear of sadness, well, I guess this would be the time for her to cry. And don't we all know that place so well? Don't we know that place We all spend some time there, and we can always go back there. But stop, wait. Do you really want to do it again? And she stayed. She stayed because she had no choice. She stayed there. And things bubbled out inside her. And some came out while some remained untouced, concealed inside. She stayed. She stayed, and once again she started noticing all the movement that was inside her. All that was waiting. Thoughts and feelings, insights and understanding. Once again she started noticing it all. And there she was, disappointed, depleted of energy, anxious and exhausted. And she stayed there in that mood, in the rock bottom of the sand, a very awkward time and place to be in. She stayed there and waited, since she had no other choice. After a few weeks, she was there. She wasn't even thinking, she still stayed, just breathing. When something unexpected happened, she heard something or someone breathing with her. She heard the sound of someone else breathing with her. How comforting it is when someone is breathing with you. Perhaps it was always there, but she couldn't tell. She could feel the breath over her cheek, and it was the wind. The wind's breath was breathing with her just like that, and it was an enjoyable feeling. Such a relief to know that someone is breathing with you. You're no longer alone. Someone is listening. Someone is here, sharing your being. And she breathed in tandem with the breeze for a while, and felt that something unusual is happening. And the breeze blew some sand over her face, and a tiny, tiny gap between her and the sand underneath her was created. And at the moment, without thinking, breathing rhythmically, the rock very naturally withdrew a fraction to the back. And the sand very naturally came and filled the gap that was created by the rock's movement. And the rock realized that, miraculously, she was a few millimeters out, slightly closer to the surface than she was. And she started to reflect upon different processes she went through when she was there, the different learnings, while you were waiting. And she waited. And surely enough, after a few more days, the wind came again, or perhaps it was always there, stroking her cheek. And when the stone's cheek was stroked, touching her core, opening a tiny place, she moved. She could feel that the wind blew some sand away beneath her, and she moved. She withdrew, fraction to the back, only to allow the sand to come and fill the gap. And the stone allowed herself to get unstuck, and she stayed there, slightly closer to the surface. And from her new position, she could even see a little bit of the ocean. She was still there. She was still moving rhythmically. She was still beautiful. And so she waited. And this time it was sooner than she thought, and the wind came. And the wind came, pushing the sand underneath her, and the rock withdrawing. And the stone is quick to take advantage of the space to withdraw, and the sand is quick to take advantage of the space and filling the gap. Day after day she waited patiently. Day after day, waiting for the wind, withdrawing, allowing the sand. And after a year's time of breathing in tandem with the wind, the moment came when the stone was free again. She was up, beautiful, strong, elegant, knowing the power of movement and the strength of stillness. Her entire body was out of the sand, and she stood there patiently breathing. And she stood there patiently and silently enjoying the wind and the sand, and she looked at the world with awe. A hand on your belly, another against your heart, watching the patterns. Where is your center? Watch your breath. Hear the undercurrent movement of what wishes to become, of what is in the process of becoming, of what is. Feel the patterns of connection. You know the story, you've always known it, so let it be known, let yourself be known, say it aloud. I am here. It is said that at that moment, the stone made a small circle, and the circle got bigger and bigger, and she started rolling up to the climax again, to the top. And when she reached the very top of the hill, looking at the beauties of the ocean, there she stopped and stayed there. And I've heard, the old man said, I have heard that the story of the stone was carried through and by the waves of the ocean, through and by the strokes of the wind, who took it to each and every corner of the world, through and by the sand of many seas, who found the most secure hidden places in and out of seas, and the story was carried through and by the gossipy seagulls, crying, singing with happiness the story of that stone, and the story was carried through and by the sun and its beams to every corner of the world. And the story was carried through and by the many formations of clouds. And the story was carried through and by teachers of Zen. And it is said that many stones around the world heard that story, and few courageous stones, few courageous rocks dared to challenge the law of nature, dared to challenge their destiny, and they started making for their journeys. And over the decades, they joined the moving stone to create that space in which we sit, a space of perfect harmony, a space of perfect Zen rock garden, a space of breath, a space at which no one could look with indifference, a space that tells the story of creation, a space which one can look at forever, the harmony of which turns oblivion into serenity, the power of which turns anxiety into curiosity, the order of which allows the thousandfold lotus of your heart to blossom. It is with breath that we can discover the journey. It is with touch that we can transform oblivion into serenity. It is with touch that we can transform anxiety into curiosity. It is with breath, it is with touch that we can invite our thousandfold lotus to blossom in our hearts. Prayers for a Rolling Stone.